Rugby Championship 2023, folks. Foreign-born and foreign-raised players. We're going to go through the 4 squads, see how much kind of imported talent there is and how much is locally produced, and you guys can let us know your thoughts on how the squads are stacking up. Anytime we talk about the foreign-born players, it can be a bit of a continuous one, but if you want to get straight to the numbers, please check out the link in the description, which will be to the America's Rugby News. Paul Tate is the guy who writes up all this information, does a bucket load of research into this, and it's got all the details of where these players were born, positions they played, when they were kind of granted residency or how they're eligible, is it through a parent, all that kind of stuff, any other teams they've played for. It's really, really a good read. So check that out down in the description. But I would say there is a bit of nuance in this. It's not always a black and white one. People have different takes on kind of what counts as a foreigner. Does it matter about your parents, your grandparents? Like, is it blood connections that's more important? Does it not matter where you were born? It's just more where you were raised and learned your trade. Everyone seems to have a different take. But, yeah, we'll go through them anyway, and you guys can let us know your thoughts. Now, South Africa, you're not really part of this conversation because you've got no players born overseas and you've got no players who were kind of produced overseas. I mean, maybe you could talk about Jean Klein, who you've nabbed back from Ireland, and he spent a bit of time learning his trade in Ireland, but only as an adult, so that would be a bit of a stretch. Ultimately, South Africa, you're not really part of the foreign-born conversation, and to be honest, Argentina, you are also not much part of the conversation. The addition, or the reacquisition of Sebastian Cancellieri back into the squad means you've got one foreign-born guy because he was born in the States. But keeping in mind, he's got Argentinian parents and he's moved back to Argentina as a child, learned his entire rugby trade in Argentina. So the idea that you would classify that guy as a foreign-born guy or foreign, produced guy is probably a bit of a stretch for mine. He's about as Argentinian as they come. Just happened to be born in a different place. I have 2 children and they were born in different countries, so that kind of thing can happen. So there you go. Those 2 squads, very, very easy to get around. Now, the Aussies and the Kiwis, a little bit, I just want to say, more detailed. A little bit more in the way of kind of immigration, I would imagine. People move to Australia and New Zealand for economic reasons, for sure. I certainly know a lot of Kiwis end up in Australia, and that will become part of the Aussie squad when you look at the number of foreign-born guys, because there are 7 foreign-born guys in the Australian squad, 4 of whom were born in New Zealand. Like I said, tons of Kiwis moved to Australia. My mum has like 5 sisters and 2 brothers, plus her mum before she passed away. Guess where they all moved to? They all lived in Australia. My mum's the only one who stayed in New Zealand. People like to go to Australia. There's more money there. What can I say? Maybe better weather as well at times. But you've got Jordan Ulisse, Will Skelton, Quade Cooper, and Lalakai Foketi, all born in New Zealand. So you've essentially got, of your 7 foreign-born guys, 4 of them are Kiwis. And then you've got Taniela Tupou, who was born in Tonga. You've got Marika Koroibete and Suliasi Vunivalu, who were born in Fiji. Now, the difference between the Fijian and Tongan guys and the Kiwi guys is all of the Kiwi guys moved to Australia at a pretty young age. Like, the oldest was Quade Cooper, who moved when he was 13. So at 13, you may have learned part of your trade in New Zealand, but ultimately you're still a kid, and you're going to classify Quade in that circumstance as a homegrown player. He's gone through the system in Australia, and he's learned his trade. So all of these guys in New Zealand, born in New Zealand, moved at a young enough age to kind of be still kind of homegrown players for the Wallabies. Now, the other 3, Tupou was picked up by New Zealand's academies, actually, or high schools, when he was, playing in Tonga. So he went through the New Zealand school system, and as an adult, he ended up playing in Australia. So he moved to Australia like age 18. So he's one of your kind of proper imported players, if you will want to call it like that. And then Marika Koroibete likewise moves to Australia when he's an adult. I think he's like 18 or 19 to play rugby league. And then Vunivalu moves to New Zealand at 16, moves to Australia at 18. And then both Koroibete and Vunivalu played rugby league for Fiji. So the 3 guys from the islands, Tupou, Koroibete, and Vunivalu, they all had their development years, the majority of them, away from Australia. So essentially with Australia, you end up with numbers of 7 and 3. So 7 are foreign born, but only 3 of them kind of went through the system outside of Australia. So that's, I don't know, not too bad numbers. And you move on to New Zealand. Now, New Zealand, by the number of foreign-born guys, has the most. We are looking at double figures. We have got 10 guys born overseas in New Zealand. That maybe lends itself to the old argument that, man, New Zealand pillages the islands for all their talent. And the majority of these guys who are foreign-born in the New Zealand squad are from either Samoa, Tonga, or Fiji. To be honest, the majority are from Tonga. Now, there are a couple of guys who are not from the islands. We're talking Australia. That's De Groot and Lomax, who both have Kiwi parents, as I mentioned. Heaps of Kiwis go to Australia for jobs. So the fact that people have babies in Australia and then maybe come back to New Zealand does not surprise me at all. And then Finlay Christie is from Scotland originally. Came to New Zealand when he was 7 years old. So certainly he's gone through his rugby education in New Zealand. De Groot came back to New Zealand as a baby, so same likewise for him. Lomax is kind of a 50-50 call. Like, he's got a dad who played rugby league for New Zealand, but then Lomax himself played under 20 rugby for Australia. I think he went to schools in both New Zealand and Australia, so Lomax is kind of one of the guys that genuinely has a proper connection to both countries, but parentally, he is a Kiwi, so that's those 3. Now, what about the island connection? Well, you've got Laulala, who's got a connection to Samoa, being born there, and I think spent most of his childhood there, but came to New Zealand, I believe, at 13. So 13 is still kind of young enough that, in Paul Tate's article, he's classified as a homegrown player. Then you've got Tuangawhasi, Tokiaho, Finau, and Whainga Unuku, who all hail from Tonga, alongside Shannon Frizzell. Now, Shannon Frizzell is different because he is one of the guys who they're classifying as kind of foreign-produced. Frizzell's going down under a kind of Tongan-produced route, whereas the other guys are all coming to New Zealand young enough that they are New Zealand-produced players, if not born in New Zealand. So you got Whainga Nuku, who comes to New Zealand at age 2, which is, that's pretty young. Then you've got Tuangawhasi at 14, Finau at 13, and then Tokiaho, who's kind of borderline. He's at 16, and I remember he came on a rugby scholarship. So Tokiaho is one of the guys that you could kind of argue, where do you draw the line between foreign produced or home produced? If you move to a country at 16, he didn't qualify for New Zealand until he would have been, I think, 19 or 20 years old. So Tokiaho is certainly borderline. The other guys are early teenage years. You can kind of make the argument either way with them, but those guys are all being classified as having spent enough time in the New Zealand system to be locally produced, whereas Frizzell, came to New Zealand a bit later, also on a rugby scholarship, but late enough that he spent enough of his time in Tonga to be kind of foreign produced. And likewise in Morinarawa, he came to New Zealand in his final year of high school, so essentially spent most of his time going through the Fijian system. So New Zealand end up with 2 guys who didn't spend enough time in New Zealand, enough time abroad to be kind of foreign-produced players. So those are your kind of raw numbers. As I said, it can be a bit of a mixed bag in terms of what you classify as homegrown. As I mentioned, Tokiaho, for mine, is the prime example. He's a guy who I think when he was 15, got identified, 16, got a scholarship, moved to New Zealand, got a rugby education here, but he ends up playing for the All Blacks instead of Tonga. Would he have been the same player if he'd stayed in Tonga? Again, we don't know, but he spent enough time in the New Zealand system that according to this, he is classified as homegrown. So there you go, folks. You guys let us know your thoughts. Personally, I think, if you come to a country when you're still a little kid, that is what it is. Some of the guys have kind of less tenuous connections than others, but yeah, certainly South Africa and Argentina, you guys aren't really much part of this conversation. But there you go. You guys let us know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.